Yeah.
Cool. I'm Kate Fox. I am the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator for one of them for EPA across the nation with recruiting. I've been here before to work with the Career Center staff, but this is my first time working with students in person, which is really exciting. And my colleague is here today helping present and doing some training as well. So I'll let him introduce himself.
Yes, my name is Ryan Barker. I'm also with the EPA. I work on the Executive Services Operations staff. We basically service, we're a one-stop HR shop for all the executive service or senior executive service members at the EPA and all the political appointees as well. So we're technically both, I guess, based out of RTP, but I work here in DC. So I'm happy to be joining today to speak with y'all. This is the first crowd I've spoken to about this stuff. So this is a big moment for all of us.
Okay, I'm just gonna dive in real quick before you guys jump in. Again, welcome everyone. I'm Bernice Samuel, the Employee Relations Coordinator at the AU Career Center. And just a few ground rules before we get into the presentation. We do have, this is a hybrid event, so some people in person, some online on Zoom. So we have a good number of attendees on Zoom as well. If you can save your questions until the end, Kate and Ryan will go through a presentation, then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. For our virtual attendees, if you can throw your questions in the chat, or if you face any technical difficulties, you can put that in the chat as well, and we'll try to troubleshoot, excuse me, as soon as possible. So thank you again, and I'll turn it back to Kate and Ryan.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Okay, y'all. So as you kind of already know from all the chit chat we've been having, this is a presentation on essentially U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, but also just federal hiring and the federal application process in general. So our goal today is to not only sell you on wanting to work at EPA, but also help you kind of bridge that knowledge gap when you look at a federal application in comparison to private sector, right? The unfortunate thing about some federal applications is the process is just a little different than what people are used to. So where, you know, for private sector, you may be able to go on LinkedIn or Indeed and just kind of throw your resume out into the universe. We have a little bit more of a process, but once you understand that process, it's actually not that hard. And so that's kind of what we're here to teach you today so that you all can go forth into wonderful federal careers. Okay. All right. So with that, we are going to do kind of an overview of EPA as a whole, what we do, what kind of opportunities there are available and in which locations. And then we're going to talk pretty deeply about navigating USA jobs and preparing a federal application. And then we'll have some quiz questions for everyone. It's really going to affect your midterm scores, so I would definitely listen up. Just kidding. And then you can ask your questions for us. So we'll definitely save some time for that. All right, so who we are, an overview of EPA. So a lot of people, when they think about federal work, they think about DC. We do have a lot of folks right here in DC at our big, beautiful headquarters building, but we have locations all across the United States and territories. So these are just some of our locations. These are our 10 regions across the United States, each of which has at least one, if not more, offices. So for example, beyond these 10, I work out of Durham, North Carolina, which isn't even depicted. So this is just a small sample of locations where you could be working. But if you have some deep dream to go live in Hawaii or in Utah, there is going to be an office in EPA or with EPA in pretty much any location. So don't rule it out, no matter where you want to be. And we also like to just reiterate to people that we aren't, just lab coats, right? We have a lot of STEM folks, that's true, but we do a ton of hiring for environmental policy, for public affairs, HR specialists. I mean, it really runs the gamut. Even facilities management, IT, those kinds of things. Like we need everybody to support our mission of protecting human health and the environment. So whether you're on the mission critical side, actually collecting the resource or putting research or putting it to use, or if you're in the Office of Mission Support, kind of literally keeping the lights on, doing press releases, that kind of thing. We also hire a lot of lawyers. So if that's something that you're into, there's a place for you at EPA. All right. So as I was just kind of saying, we hire all across the board. These are just a few examples of the different kinds of positions that we hire for. Right now, we're doing significant hiring related to the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So over the next year, it's likely that will bring in, 1,000 more people in an agency that is only about 15,000. So that's a pretty drastic increase. So if you're looking for work in the federal government, now is a really smart time to start exploring these opportunities at EPA. I think we have a lot of people kind of in like the public policy law. Are there any other like big majors out there in the crowd? Shout them out.
Environmental science.
Yes. Okay, cool. That's an obvious one for EPA.
Sustainability management.
Yeah. Okay. So these are all really applicable. So just because, you may go on USA Jobs and see a lot of like engineering or physical science. We are also frequently posting positions that if you actually read the qualifications, those kinds of majors do qualify or get you close, right? They put you on the right track. Your studies put you on the right track towards those positions. And then another thing that people don't always realize is that federal agencies work hand in hand. So by working at EPA, you get an opportunity to do a lot of kind of collateral duty or extracurricular things. For example, just last year, the EPA deployed hundreds of employees from all different duties across the nation to assist with the humanitarian crisis with unaccompanied children at the US southern border. And that was a voluntary detail where we just said, hey, it doesn't matter what your job is right now, there is a need for this. And we had, everyone from physical scientists to public affairs specialists coming from all across the country on voluntary details to the border. We do similar things with FEMA. When there are natural disasters, the hurricanes in Puerto Rico, for example. So there just are a wealth of opportunities for folks to not only dive into, a one-track federal career, but also to explore other federal opportunities while they are on their career path with EPA. It's just something kind of cool to keep in mind. So if you're not convinced yet, here are some other reasons that you may want to consider joining EPA or the federal team. Again, fascinating opportunities. So a lot of the people that we work with are returned Peace Corps volunteers, veterans, cutting edge scientists, PhD, researchers. Like you really can't get a better group of folks to learn from and just gain experiential knowledge. And if you come into one role, maybe as a recent graduate position or even a student intern, you're not stuck in that role, right? Once you're in the federal government, it's so easy to move around, to even shift to a different office, a different agency. Getting your foot in the door is really the best thing to do at a young age or earlier in your career, so that then, the doors of opportunity really open up to all these different opportunities. That was a lot of opportunity. Okay. Unparalleled work-life balance. So this is huge, y'all. I know a lot of people are really interested in remote work, in telework, and all those kinds of things. EPA currently offers up to 80% telework in many of its offices. And once you've been on board for about 3 months, people can start applying for fully remote work. Those are kind of reviewed on a case-by-case basis. We do see the value in folks still collaborating somewhat in the office. You can't replicate some of the interpersonal communication that happens when we're together. But that being said, our flexibilities are far beyond many other federal agencies when it comes to telework. In addition, compressed schedules and maximum flexibility schedules are a huge component of life at EPA. So for example, my schedule mimics a what we call 8, 9, and 1 or something, where you work 9-hour days and then you have 1 8-hour day and 1 extra day off the pay period. People can do 4-10s, similar to like a nursing schedule almost, where you have 4 long days, then you have every Friday off, right? And then in addition to that, we have maxi flex schedules, which is where even within sort of that broader layout, you can say, hey, I'm going to work my 9-hour day, but I'm going to start at home from 6 to 9. Then I'm going to take an hour break to, hit the gym and then show up to the office at 10, work another 4 hours and kind of piece it together that way, which is just so cool this day and age to not feel stuck in that 9 to 5, Monday through Friday job experience. So pretty cool thing to consider. deep connection to work, I mean, human health, the environment, what could be more important than that? So I'll let that kind of speak for itself. People show up to work and they're excited about what they do and why they do it. And that sense of community is really impactful in your daily work life. Competitive salaries and benefits. I think the federal government sometimes gets a bad rap for our salaries, but if you look at our promotional potential, it's pretty incredible that someone who's brought on at a GS7 level, their first year out of undergrad, in just 3 years, they could be at their full performance level, which is the GS12. And so when you look at these USA Jobs announcements, what you really want to look at is not just the starting GS level, the starting pay grade. You want to look at the full performance level. And when you look at that full performance level, that is indicating to you that you're on a career ladder. So each year, assuming you are meeting the requirements of the job, and dependent on the supervisor being satisfied with your performance, you would then not have to compete to go up to the next grade level or even 2 grade levels. So if you started a GS7 and your full performance scale is a 12, in 1 year, if your performance is satisfactory, you'll be a 9, which is a pretty significant pay increase. The following year, you'd be an 11, and the year after that, you'd be a 12, and then potentially a 13. So when you're looking at these roles, think about the next 3 years. Don't just think about what you're starting out at. It's pretty cool to get that promotion automatically. Just saying.
I
Okay.
just want to, can I just say, I don't know how familiar y'all are with the GSK scale, but that ultimately ends up being like a $12,000 to $15,000 bump. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty significant promotion if you're on a career ladder.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Absolutely. And if you are not familiar with the GS pay scale, it's a quick Google search.
Yeah.
So our salaries are public knowledge. You can go right now to Google and type in GS pay scale 2022, and it will show you based on locality what each GS level is making. And actually, another great point that you kind of reminded me of is that many folks don't really know where they would fall in that GS pay scale. So the GS 3 to 5 tends to be interns. GS 7 to 9 tends to be entry level, maybe fresh out of undergrad or fresh out of grad school. And then your 11s and 12s are going to be more mid-career or looking for some level of significant experience, whether through a PhD or, experience in the workforce. 13s, 14s, and 15s, you're looking at more leadership roles and managerial. So keep that in mind when you are filtering for jobs that you'd be qualified for. Those GS levels are going to help you find the ones that are right for you. Before I move on, any questions on that? That was a lot of nuanced information. There'll be more time for questions, but I just wanted to take a pause. And then, of course, huge commitment to diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. So this is, these are all really hot topic words right now. I know that people get tired of hearing agencies and companies just say these things over and over, but I can tell you from my experience working at EPA that just in the last few years, there has been a massive increase in not only the work we're doing for outreach to underrepresented communities, environmental justice outreach, but also actually implementing, new tactics, new organizational structure, new strategy, if you will, both internally and in a lot of our hiring processes and those kinds of things. To promote these values and to sustain these values. And so we're looking to continue to improve not only in our diversity and inclusion, but creating diversity and inclusion in a system that is equitable. And that is a really big difference that I think is important to note. So, okay, let's get into it. So applying to federal jobs, understanding your application. All right, when you are on USA Jobs, you all are really going to want to focus your attention to the Pathways program. Pathways program is set up for students, recent graduates, and they also have a fellowship program called the Presidential Management Fellows. I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but if that's something you're interested in, quick Google search, you can learn all about that. For our purposes today, I'm going to focus pretty heavily on student trainees and recent graduates in the Pathways program. So student trainees are paid student internships. They can be either indefinite, where you may start as, we'll say, a sophomore or a first-year grad student, and it can continue all the way through your enrollment. So that includes if you started as a sophomore and then you went to grad school, you can stay on as a student trainee. Maybe you're part-time in the school year, full-time in the summer, you can kind of go back and forth, and then you can potentially be converted to a permanent employee once you complete your schooling. So the other option are the not to exceed timelines, and those would be more like a traditional summer internship. So every vacancy announcement for student training positions is going to tell you whether it's not to exceed 90 days, not to exceed 120 days, or if it's indefinite, kind of ongoing throughout your schooling. That's something really important to look for because it obviously, impacts your life and work schedule for the next several years potentially. For student training positions, you have to be enrolled at least half time. You can work during the summer, like if you're in between taking classes, as long as you show that you are enrolled moving forward. And again, those can be converted to permanent positions. Generally, you see those conversions happening with those indefinite appointments that would continue. But we do have students that have done short-term internships and then end up being employees later on. It just is a little bit more awkward because there's kind of that gap where they would return to school after their appointment as a student trainee is terminated. Recent graduates. So this is going to be for students and alumni within 2 years of their latest graduation. So that means that if you're a grad student, you could be eligible for both a student trainee position and a recent graduate position, right? There is an exception here for vets. So if a vet was unable to apply to the Pathways program because they were, say, deployed or active duty, they have up to 6 years from their latest graduation. So another thing to keep in mind. These generally are converted to permanent positions. Policy-wise, we say they may be converted, but I will tell you, from my experience, we see that the intention is really to get someone in a kind of that entry-level recent grad, fresh out of school, really put a year into training that person, working with them. And then, we want to see that person develop into a permanent employee. So we'll say may, but I would like to say that generally speaking, that's kind of the way that it goes. Some positions will allow students to apply before they have graduated. So remember, generally speaking, this is going to be you've already graduated. But if you're reading the vacancy announcement on USA Jobs, it will specify if you're eligible to apply before graduation. You really want to make sure you're clear on that so you don't waste your time applying to something for which you're ineligible. And then we have non-competitive appointments. So this is outside of the Pathways program. This is for certain communities of students or people in general that can essentially be appointed to federal positions without competing with the general public. So most people are going to have to apply on USA Jobs, but if you are a veteran who is eligible for certain hiring authorities, a return Peace Corps or AmeriCorps Vista volunteer with non-competitive eligibility, or a person with a disability who may be eligible for a Schedule A appointment, those would be positions that you can be brought on kind of similarly to the private sector almost, where through a referral or at a career fair, if we receive your resume and your and documentation that you are in one of these communities, it's different details for each one, of course, but you could be brought on non-competitively. So again, that could even be for a position that's not necessarily advertised on USA Jobs. So if you identify with one of those communities, if you're a person with a disability or a veteran or a Peace Corps or AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, definitely keep that in mind. And we're happy to answer more questions about that later on as well. But for the majority of our students and recent grads, focus your attention heavily on that Pathways program, student trainee, and recent graduate appointments, which are all advertised on USA Jobs. Okay, so navigating USA Jobs. So I'm actually going to, is it going to be too funky with the visuals if I share my screen and go on to USA Jobs to show them this?
No,
Okay.
that should be fine.
Okay, awesome. So it'll be a little clunky. I'm going to give you kind of an intro to this first. So a lot of times what happens with USA Jobs is folks get in there, they're like, oh, my profile's made, I'm ready to apply, let's go. And then they go to search for jobs and 10,000 come up and they're like, what is happening? I don't know what I'm eligible for. They apply to things that they're not qualified. They don't know what the GS skills are. So I'm going to kind of break that down here for y'all. Actually going to do kind of a live demo. So I'm going to face my computer and pull this up. Okay. So if you are on USA Jobs, obviously the first thing that you're going to want to do is search EPA. So we're assuming that you're looking for a job at EPA, right? So when you do this, 164 jobs comes up. That's way too much to digest. We want to narrow that down. You, of course, can put in a location preference if you want, but my recommendation would just to be kind of see what's out there across the board. And to do that, we want to find those pathways positions right now. So I'm going to go over here to hiring paths. Some of these other hiring paths may apply to you, and so you can search through all of them. But for today's purposes, I want to focus us on these right here, students and recent graduates. And those are those positions that we just talked about in the Pathways program. They're indicated by those little markers, the book and the graduation hat. So I'm going to try to find a recent grad position for us to take a look at. You can see that now there's 11 jobs up. That's way more digestible. I feel so much better about kind of looking through each of these. And again, they're all across the United States. So this one is a recent graduate position, GS 7 to 9 level. I'm going to click into it. You know, this one happens to be for interdisciplinary sciences, but the same kind of instructions would apply for any of these positions. So when you go in here, even though you used those hiring paths to find jobs for which you are eligible, you always want to triple check your eligibility. So eligibility is different than qualifications. We just want to find out, am I in the pool of candidates that can be considered for this? And to do that, I'm going to go down here to this job is open to. So it tells me this job is open to recent grads, but then I'm going to read this clarification from the agency section to make sure. And the reason I want to do that is because remember, some recent grad positions let you apply before you've graduated and others do not. So that clarification from the agency is really important. If I meet all the criteria listed in that section, then I know that check, I'm eligible. Now I can see if I'm qualified. So I'm going to scroll all the way down. Of course, you're going to want to read the duties and all of that to see if it's interesting to you. But as far as knowing whether you make the cut, so to speak, we're going to go down past requirements. There's a lot of information here. You'll read it all, I'm sure. And we are going to look at the qualifications section. So this phrase right here, to qualify for the GSX level, you need to have at least 1 year full-time experience at the GSY level defined as. You're going to see something like that in almost every federal announcement that you look at. That's what we call the specialized experience statement. So when your job gets submitted, you are applying with 2 different reviewers in mind. The first reviewer is HR. You have to get your application through HR before it even goes to the hiring manager. Meeting the criteria listed in this specialized experience statement is going to be your best path to do that. So whenever you see this, this is what you want to hone in on when you're writing your resume. That doesn't mean copy and paste it into your resume. It doesn't mean it has to be certain words. We don't use a robot. It's a real person reading it. But it is our job to check based on policy that your application demonstrates clearly that you meet the criteria listed in the specialized experience statement. Then everything else is what makes you competitive, right? So you get past HR because you've met the minimum qualifications. And then once you're at the hiring manager phase, that's where they're going to be like, wow, this person had, all these extracurriculars and they're a leader and they're this and they're that, right? You want to include all that stuff too, but we want you to really think about the fact that this has to be represented in your resume. So keep that specialized experience statement in mind. The other thing I want to point out here is that many positions, especially the student trainee positions and the recent graduate positions, will allow you to substitute education for experience, okay? So you see here, or 1 full year of graduate level education or superior academic achievement, really good grades in the academic discipline as described below, right? So what that's saying is you can have the specialized experience or you can have this education. Now, this gets confusing. Substituting education for experience is different than meeting an educational requirement. So after I've checked out the qualifications, I want to go down a little further and I'm going to look and see if there's an educational requirement. This particular job does have an educational requirement. So what that means is, regardless of my qualifications, I have to meet the educational requirement first. If I meet the educational requirement, then I may be able to substitute qualifications for my education. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope that's clear because that is really confusing. So we've checked now that we're eligible, we've checked that we're qualified, and we've checked that we meet the educational requirements. So that means that I'm likely a competitive candidate for this job. Okay, so then of course, we're going to go up here and click apply. Now, I'm not going to take you all the way through the, filling in the application, but what I can tell you is that the biggest thing you want to do, like right now, this evening, this weekend, whenever, yesterday, is build your profile in USA Jobs. Building your profile means that you've got your resumes, your transcripts, your biographical data, all that stuff is already uploaded. So when you find a job you want to apply to, particularly if there's a short application window, you can just pull all that stuff right into the job application. The profile will take you some time to build. It's like building that first MySpace back in I don't know, were you guys around in 2006? So think about, putting a lot of intention into that. Because when these jobs pop up, a lot of times there's an applicant limit. So you want to apply really quickly, or it's only open for 5 days. So you might not have time to build that whole profile. So do that now if you're interested in federal employment, and then you can drag and drop as needed. Yes.
We have 2 relevant questions. Can we?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great.
Totally.
So the first question was, some people are trying to seek clarification on the qualifications. So to qualify for a GS7 level, do you need a bachelor's degree or do you need at least a year of graduate school?
It's going to depend. So it depends on the type of position, and it's all going to be listed in the vacancy announcement. So that's why it's really important to read that qualification section really clearly. Some positions don't have an educational requirement at all, right? So for example, if you went and looked at an HR specialist position, there's not an educational requirement for that. And I can't speak to I can't remember whether you can substitute education or not, but you always want to submit your transcripts. You always want to submit your educational documentation, because your job is to give us the information and our job is to get you qualified and eligible based on the information you submit. So we will piece it together for you. If you have any doubt in your mind, just submit more information, but read that vacancy announcement because it's going to depend on what's written there.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but just getting at that question of what qualifies you for a GS7, as Kate said, it's, it differs, but it's pretty rare, I think, that a GS7 job requires graduate experience. Is that true?
That is correct.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can substitute graduate experience for like GS9. I think that's when it more so comes into play, but I think for GS7, it's very rare that they would require graduate experience.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
GS7, you're really looking at that entry level. Like that's where you can substitute a year of graduate experience for the specialized experience, but you don't have to have the graduate experience to qualify. So again, the nuance difference between educational requirement versus substitution of education for experience. It's a lot, but read it. You'll get it. It'll sink in. It's like a math test.
Okay.
Okay. What was the other one?
We actually, I'll do the second one, and then the other 2 virtual attendees will address during the Q&A. So the second one was, can you say how many years a PhD is equal to substitute for experience?
Yeah, so just like the GS9, you can sometimes use a master's degree to qualify you for the GS9 in place of work experience. You can use a PhD level degree to substitute for the GS11 in certain positions. So we kind of look at like PhD at the 11 level, grad school at the 9, and bachelor's at kind of the 7. But those substitutions, again, it's all going to depend on the type of job for which you're applying.
Does it matter the completion of the grade? Like if you're first year grad student or like a junior, would that still allow you to be eligible for those levels, or is it based on completed years of schooling?
It would be completed. Okay. Yeah, yeah. But it can also be a combination of education and experience. So it really is nuanced depending on each person, each application. And that's why like we don't have a robot doing this. We have a trained person being able to look at all your documentation and give you the best, level of eligibility and qualifications that they can. So, yeah, okay. The only other thing I want to point out on USA Jobs is, go back here. It's really weird because it's on the screen. Okay. So let's say that you put in this search and nothing that you like popped up, but you know that this is your search criteria. Like you're like, even if you put in a location, say, and nothing popped up that day. What you can do is you can save your search in your profile. And then you can actually set notifications in your profile so that when something that meets your filter criteria does pop up, you get an email. And again, because there are short application windows and sometimes there are applicant limits, doing that can really save you the stress of trying to go search through USA Jobs every single day to see what's new. So find your ideal kind of search criteria, save it to your profile and set those notifications so that you apply first. Okay, I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint. Let me find my mouse. People are going to watch this recording and be like, what is that? Okay. There it is. Okay. All right. So again, think of it like, the 5-fingered hand, right? We checked our hiring pass for eligibility. Then we triple checked with clarification from the agency. We looked at educational requirements. We looked at specialized experience for qualifications, and then we learned how to save searches and set notifications. So those are kind of your 5 super duper steps for nailing it on USA Jobs. All right, building a resume to upload. So you have 2 options when you do a federal application. You can either use the USA Jobs resume builder, or you can upload your own resume. We don't have a specific preference. It's not going to make you qualify any more or less, as long as you make sure that you include, those crucial things in either version of the resume. So if you've never built a federal resume and you don't have, a solid resume template to use, just go ahead and use the USA Jobs resume builder. It's going to help guide you through the process to make sure you include all the relevant information. But if you're kind of an established job seeker, you've got a really nice resume you want to use, you can totally build your own. There are just a few recommendations that we want to point out. So the big thing for federal job applications is, because of that specialized experience, we need to know your dates and hours worked for different jobs. So remember, they're trying to piece together 1 full year of experience at the GSX level, right? So we're going to use the dates and hours that you put on your resume, so that even if you were a part-time student with, working say 20 hours a week, but for 2 years at the GS5 level, we could say, okay, well, that's equal to 1 year of full-time experience. So we will piece that together for you if you give us the information. So always include your dates and hours, and that includes for volunteer work. Facts and figures. So facts and figures kind of help us to establish what level you're at in your career without you just saying your salary, because we don't necessarily transition salaries directly into like GS scale, because they differ in the private sector a little bit. So you kind of telling us, like, for example, in this one, I'm sure this is very small for you all, but this person indicated that they improved training test scores by 42% for HR staff trainees. They identified external training opportunities for 40 junior staff members. So some of those stats let me know that this person was not entry level, right? They were a little bit higher. They had some folks under them. Maybe they were a mentor. Maybe they're kind of mid-level career. Those stats, facts, and figures are going to help us determine where you're at, kind of what level you are qualification wise. Awards and accolades. This is where you're really writing to the hiring manager. Those are going to be the things that don't necessarily determine whether or not you're qualified for the job based on federal policy, but they're going to make you special, right? They're going to make you shine when that resume gets to the person who's actually looking to fill that job in their office. So include that stuff in there too. And then I'm sure you all know this, but you should always have someone review your resume before you apply. Just like anything you do, getting a second set of eyes on it can just kind of help take away some of that fear, especially when you've been looking at a resume for hours and hours. It's just easy to miss things because your eyes just start to go crossed, it gets crazy. And then keep it concise. So as students and recent grads, your resume really shouldn't be more than 2 pages max. If you can get it down to 1 page, great. Play with formatting, use a template that allows you to fill the whole page. But you really should try not to send, a 50-page resume for an entry-level job. We'll still look at it if you do, but we don't love it. Okay. And then always be ready to respond to questions about your resume in an interview. So, you probably didn't have lunch with Lady Gaga and talk about how to change the world. But, if you did, make sure that you can back that up in an interview. I would love to have that opportunity. It's not on my resume yet. Okay. And then also it's okay to ask specific questions in an interview. So I think a lot of people get nervous that if they ask too many questions, it's going to make them look like they're not interested in the job, or they don't, the job might not meet their specific requirements, or they're being picky. That's not true. We want to know that candidates coming in are truly trying to find the right job for them. So be ready to ask questions about the position, research the office that you're, applying to work in, understand the mission of EPA or wherever you're going to work, and be ready to really engage in a conversation about that position and the duties that it entails. Ooh, that's a lot of talking. Okay, so it's almost time for you all to ask us questions, but first, Ryan is going to lead us in some super fun trivia.
Yeah. So raise your hand if you like free stuff. We have the best kind of free stuff, EPA branded free stuff. So get ready, y'all. So I only have a few questions here to ask y'all. This is all based on the presentation, so hopefully you guys you're paying attention. Question number 1, what is the federal program called that includes student trainee, recent grads, and PMS positions? Pathways. A round of applause.
I feel like I need to moderate over here to see who raises their hand
Yes,
first.
you like to get it done.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, question number 2. Name 2 items covered that are critical to include in your resume.
Ooh, I think she was
Go for it,
first.
yeah.
In your resume,
Yes.
facts and figures
That's one.
and specific dates and hours worked.
Yeah.
There we go. Applause. All right. Thank you. 4 more questions, y'all. The free stuff is almost over with. All right. Question number 3. Name a criteria that allows for a non-competitive hire.
I think it was you for sure.
Boom.
Yeah.
Got it.
Good job.
Awesome.
Y'all were paying attention. Love it.
All right. Question number 4. For how many years after graduation are you considered eligible for a recent graduate appointment?
Oh, that was
Yeah, that one was
that was
like
really
it was one of
hard.
these over two over here.
I defer to you. You got to make this tough decision.
I saw blue shirt.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know. Yes.
2 years.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Question number 5. What is the online database called that contains all of the
Oh.
current federal job postings?
I think it was her.
USA.gov.
I'm trying not to be biased towards this side of the room.
jobs.gov.
There we go. There we go. There we go. All right. Last question, y'all.
Oh my gosh, stakes are high.
How many employees does the EPA have?
That was the end. Yeah.
Amazing.
Wow. Good job. Good job.
And we got some online answers too.
Okay, cool.
So with that, I guess we can go to the QA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. What questions y'all have for us?
Okay, so I have been working on my resume on the resume builder.
Okay.
And I watched like a bunch of different videos about how to make the resume building for like what you need to do.
Yeah.
And I have like heard that you're supposed to be super descriptive and detailed about like everything you do. And that like I noticed that the word count is like 700 words for like the descriptions. So like, I was like told that we're supposed to be super descriptive, this is the like federal resume. Is that not something was not to be like super detailed about everything?
It
So I was like
depends.
trying to scrape all these different details and information about all the jobs.
Right. I hear you. So I think the reason that the builder asked you to be really descriptive is because it's intending you to have one resume for every job that you're applying to. In reality, a best practice is to have a fresh, a different resume with some variations for each job to which you apply.
Mhm.
So in that case, you should include all the details that are relevant to the job for which you're applying. But you don't need to include, that time you pet sat for your Aunt Karen in 1995, right?
Mhm.
I guess I've been, I don't know. I don't know that. Like, are you making old people jokes? Okay, so that being said, if you have one resume and that's the one you're sticking with, then yes, include all the nitty-gritty details. But my advice would be to have a different resume for each job to which you apply. And the great thing about the USA Jobs profile is you can store all those different resume versions in there, and then pick and choose which ones to use. Yes.
So for a lot of the different GS levels, they talk about like years of undergraduate experience, especially around like 3, 4, 5.
Mhm.
And a lot of like I'm on kind of like an accelerated track, and I kind of brought in stuff like AP credits that have now been like
Sure.
related by this institution.
Mhm.
So in terms of all of that together, if I think I can like kind of smush it together in a way that maybe I'm like GS3 or GS4 with a year of education and 2 years of education, but a lot of that comes from APs, and maybe I'm potentially jumping the gun. What do you have to say about like in terms of if I have technically 60 credits as per AU, and that's the like definition under USA Jobs of being like GS4, but then in actuality I haven't been here very long.
Right.
Is that jumping the gun in terms of certain positions that I might apply for under like GS4, or would you say go for it if I can, again, give HR X amount of material that shows I do have 60 hours and have some college stuff in senior year, et cetera? What are thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. So if you have those credits and they are, certifiable, documented college credits, those will go towards you being eligible for, say, like the GS3 or qualified either for the GS3, GS4, whatever it may be. What my recommendation would be is when you're submitting documentation, if you think that there's a chance someone could get confused, provide clarity, right? And that goes also for like any educational documentation. So for example, some of the educational requirements may say that you need to have 24 credit hours in a certain type of class. And it's very obvious from your transcript that you have 20, but there's this one 4-credit class that's kind of titled something weird that wouldn't be, unless you've taken it, you wouldn't know. You can actually submit a course write-up or like a syllabus that demonstrates that the material taught in that class was relevant. So same thing goes for you, like submit your submit documentation that those AP credits are in fact, college level courses. As long as we can see that you have that number of college level credit hours, we're going to say that you are qualified or eligible, depending on what criteria you're trying to meet. So again, then you'd want to be competitive. So that may make a difference. Like if you have less on the ground experience, that may look different to the hiring manager. But as far as getting you those credits you need to have your resume passed on, it sounds like you could make those work for you. Just, submit that documentation though.
Regarding non-competitive appointments, well, can I ask a two-part question?
Yeah, totally.
You mentioned that AmeriCorps Vista members or former members are not competitive. Does that apply to other AmeriCorps branches like NCCC or Singapore as well?
Unfortunately, no. It's AmeriCorps Vista. It's that one full year that has to be completed, and then they get like a letter certifying that they have non-competitive eligibility. Now, there are some programs like I believe maybe Fulbright, and there's certain programs through like Department of State that also grant non-competitive eligibility, but you would receive a letter from the organization at the end of your service that says like you are eligible for non-competitive appointments. If you have any questions about it, I would recommend reaching out to your organization directly and finding out, if there is any workaround there. Generally speaking, AmeriCorps non-competitive eligibility is only Vista.
I think that answers the part two, which is, so the referral basis would be that letter that you receive at the end. Not like you would have to reach out to your former supervisor and say, let me confirm that I'll. Was about that, right?
I mean, we would do references, but that'd be different from confirming your eligibility. Yeah, similar to like a veteran getting documentation from the VA, right? Like Peace Corps volunteers, AmeriCorps Vista, Fulbright scholars, foreign scholars, those kinds of things, they get documentation at the end of their service that says to the hiring agency that they are eligible. So that's
And
what.
it generally says for like how long as well, like when
Yes.
does this expire? Yeah, it has all the details there.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you guys for being here today. I really appreciate it. I just had a question about what the process looks like after you apply for a position and if there's interest in you as a candidate, what does that process look like through the interviews? Like how many are there? How long does it typically take? Just kind of, if you all could speak to that portion of the application.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
I feel like you've got more experience with her. So I'm gonna defer to her.
Okay, I'll give you can talk about your personal experience because
Sure.
you came on more recently.
Yeah, yeah.
So generally speaking, our goal is from a hiring manager saying, I want to hire someone and submitting a request to HR to start that process, all the way to having a person in a seat. Our goal is to have that complete within 90 days. Now, there are horror stories where for some reason or another, a background check got, delayed and it took months and months. And so you'll hear people talk about that and be like, oh, this one time. But generally speaking, we're pretty good at sticking to that time frame. Now, a lot of people have trouble interpreting their status in USA Jobs. So once you apply in USA Jobs, it takes a while for all those resumes to be reviewed, of course. And then your status will change depending on whether or not you were referred to the hiring manager. You want to check, I would say, after the application closes. So if the close date is, October 25th, I would wait maybe 3 weeks, check your status then. If your status was that you were ineligible or deemed unqualified, then that's the end of the road, right? If you were referred to the hiring manager, then the hiring manager has, I think, 30 days, correct me if I'm wrong, to do interviews and make a selection. So generally speaking, between the application closing and someone being selected, you're looking at like a month to 6 weeks, maybe. But there are cases where the hiring manager decides they don't want to make a selection or things can happen. They might bring on a veteran or someone non-competitively, and so they don't end up going through that USA Jobs route. So it really depends on the different jobs, but we always say like apply to as many jobs as you can, because once your profile is built, it's a fast process.
I started about 1.5 years ago. That checks out. I think 3 to 4 months is about how long it took from start to finish. And I think I had 3 interviews. So I know that you'll have more than one. You're definitely gonna have more than one interview all the way through. I think 2 is normal, 3, but probably not more than 2 to 3.
Yeah,
That's true. So that's what I would add to that.
After this next hand, we'll do some virtual questions
okay,
too. Yeah.
perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. Very helpful, informative. So you touched on this a little bit, but just based on your experience, what are some other common mistakes that you've seen from students and postgraduates that have kind of disqualified them throughout the hiring process?
Yeah, great question. I would say a lot of resumes are not written to that specialized experience statement. So people will focus on, and this is part of the beauty of USA Jobs is that vacancy announcement has so much information. And even myself, when I was applying to a job, I was looking at, there's a section in there called like knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? And you're thinking like, oh, these are what they're looking for in my resume. It's true, we want to see those things, but don't write it just towards that. Make sure that you're writing it to that specialized experience statement. And then add the supporting stuff. So that's huge. Forgetting to submit proper documentation. So like if there's an educational requirement and you don't submit a transcript, we're not sending your resume on. What else can you think?
Yeah, I think, typos, honestly, like it's more common than you would anticipate. That's unfortunate. And then, I mean, these announcements are really prompts, right? So treat it like an assignment in one of your classes. Like answer the prompt, like, look at what is required. Try to speak exactly what is listed in the vacancy announcement in your resume. It's very obvious, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's very obvious when somebody submits a resume that they have submitted to 10 other
Yeah.
places. So if that's what it feels like, you're probably not gonna keep going in the process. So, like I said, answer the prompt. If you do, you're much more likely to keep going.
That's very true.
Great.
I think
Yeah.
we have to do these. and
We're,
then
yeah,
we'll
we're
come
gonna
back to
take
you.
a few virtual. So the first question, can international students apply for internships?
Oh, this is a bummer.
I
but
know.
We have
Yeah.
to prioritize towards US citizens, so
Yeah.
there are very rare occasions in which highly specialized jobs will go to non-US citizens. And that's only if there is not a US citizen qualified that has applied, and that's very, very rare. And I don't even know, I mean, that was
It's
years
like
ago.
Really like high level experts.
Yeah,
and stuff
right.
like that.
Yeah,
So,
Mhm.
so generally speaking, unfortunately, these jobs would not be available to international students.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, next one. So is it okay to have, if you have a bachelor's from overseas that's not accredited, but you hold a PhD from here?
You would need to submit I forget what it's called, but there are essentially organizations that will do like equivalency, proof. It's slipping my mind at this moment what it's actually called, but you have to submit documentation that shows that the credits or degree that you received abroad is equivalent to the credits or degree that exists, in the United States.
Okay. That makes
Do you know
sense.
what that's called, Darnie?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay,
Um,
it's gonna come to me like in 30
yeah.
minutes, but yeah, if you look it up, you'll find it.
Sounds good. Thank you. So as far as resumes, what if you're unsure the exact dates and months of your past jobs?
It's a good question. Yeah, if it was a while ago, estimate,
I mean, yeah,
That's what I
that was
was
gonna be my answer too.
Yeah.
best guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, we know that you might not be able to track it to the 30-minute mark, right?
Yeah.
But we're just looking to see, like, generally speaking, was this full-time? Was it part-time? If it was part-time, are we talking 4 hours a week or are we talking 30 hours a week, right? There's a big difference there. So give us really the best information that you can.
Perfect. If you build your resume using USA Jobs, will it calculate out your cumulative work experience for you? How will you know which jobs hours qualify for a cumulative 1 year of relevant experience?
Do you want me to answer that? Do you want to answer that?
I'll start by saying, I think the system's not the one that's calculating the things, right? Because we don't use a robot,
Right.
right? So I don't think there's any calculation that the system does. But I'll let you take it from there.
So our whole job, the painstaking process of becoming a staffing specialist in the federal government is that you are an expert resume reader. So our goal is to qualify you, right? Like if we're looking at a 50-page resume and we get to page 20 and, we can piece together 36 hours of work for a year in the relevant experience, but we're still looking for that four more hours. We'll keep reading to page 50. So we're going to piece it together for you the best that we can. But that's why it's really your job to make that easy for us. If we can understand from your resume, in the beginning of each block that this experience definitely speaks to the specialized experience listed in the vacancy announcement, and it was 10 hours a week here. And then the next block is, okay, this was 20 hours a week, and it also speaks to that, right? We're going to piece each of those together, but you have to communicate that clearly in the documentation that you submit.
Perfect. All right, I'll do, I think maybe 2 or 3 more, and then we'll go back to any in-person questions. Does the EPA hiring managers look up applicants' social media or search their names on Google?
I think, yeah, I mean, that's not like a policy practice. So, yeah. But
I think they're not supposed to.
yeah,
right?
I mean,
It's like probably technically.
yeah, technically, like, I don't think anybody's trying to like dig deep into your personal life.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there one out there that maybe has? I don't know.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to say too, because like my team only deals with political appointees.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's not.
It's different.
It's different.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Those things are probably already known.
Right.
you know.
I mean, also guys like, and gals, people in general, like, just be smart about what you're posting on.
Yeah.
Like, if you're applying to jobs and your Instagram is looking a little shady, like maybe let's just, deactivate it.
Put it on private.
Yeah, like
Put it on
just,
private.
private, like just look out for yourself. Anything you put on there, y'all know it's all up in the cloud. We like just protect yourself.
I like that answer. Are there any internships or entry-level positions for journalism or communication majors?
Totally, yeah. So we literally hire, I mean, the positions that we have run the gamut. You can speak to this.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
I mean, there are tons of public affairs specialists,
Oh, yeah.
jobs at the EPA. If you type that into USA Jobs, there will be a lot of results.
Mhm.
Public affairs specialists. When we have an office of public affairs, there's a ton in the way of journalism or public affairs work that EPA has. I'm sure there are plenty of internships. Again, you'll have to look on USA Jobs, but
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing that doesn't do us any favors in recruiting is that a lot of times our position titles are vague. So when you're looking, you might see 20 program analyst positions and you're like, what the heck's a program analyst, right?
Mhm.
But then if you read the duties, you're like, oh, this program analyst writes for press, right? Or this program analyst does human capital data. Like it can be so many different things within that one umbrella title. So when you see general titles like that, program analyst, management analyst, admin, specialist,
environmental protection specialist.
Yes.
Even,
oh my
like,
gosh.
those are really big in EPA.
Right, like
Yeah.
there are these umbrella things that really what you're looking at is the duties that are listed in the vacancy announcement.
Yeah.
So dive into those, don't just scroll over it because it says like HR specialist, for example, like I do a ton of public affairs work. That I would say that my main duties are public affairs roles. But my technical title is HR specialist, which when you think about that, you think of like staffing, staffing, classification, that sort of thing, or like firing people, which I don't do, thank goodness. But in actuality, it's social media and branding and doing events like this. So don't chalk it up just to the title. Dive into what those duties are and kind of what you'd actually be doing in the role to have a better understanding.
Last one from here. Are there any common pathways? Are there any common pathways hiring timelines for EPA each year? For the pathways program?
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah, so we, they happen on a rolling basis, so like just now you saw there are like 11 pathways positions listed. I will say we see a spike certainly in like the December through March timeframe, because that is a really great time for offices to start onboarding folks so that they're ready to roll come May or June in the summertime, which is when most students want their internships to start. So you will see a spike at that time. Recent grad positions, again, rolling basis, but you'll start to see a spike kind of around that graduation period, right? So keep an eye out, set notifications, but definitely for internships, check it out in those winter months, because that's when you're going to see a lot more.
Any other in-person questions?
You had a question.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about resumes, but in terms of like a cover letter, would we even bother writing that or put it in the supporting documentation, or is it best that we don't? And kind of like how do we navigate that?
Again, my team doesn't really deal with.
Right. Okay. Just want to like give you a.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
like,
I appreciate
I'm seeing the
it.
facial expressions and I'm
Yeah.
like,
No.
okay, so cover letters are not required. Again, this is where you're writing your application for two different parties, right? Just because it's not required doesn't mean it's not gonna make you look a little better or tell your story to the hiring manager. So if it's something that you have that you're proud of and you feel like it pieces together some of your experiences in a way that tells your experiential story, then add it in there. It's certainly not gonna hurt you unless it's really bad with grammar and all of that, but I'm sure no one in this room would submit a poor cover letter. So it can only help, but it's not a requirement. And I won't say that it would like make or break your application.
To their point, is it better to have no cover letter or a generic cover letter that's clear that like, although you target it towards generally the EPA as
Sure.
opposed to like Forest Service or something, that you didn't tailor it to that specific position? I mean, because it's a lot, we talked about like sometimes when I'm bored, I go on USA Jobs, I apply to like 50 jobs, I get none of them, but like, that's what I do. And so it's like, it already takes some amount of time, so to then like customize these cover letters to jobs I won't get to is also a lot of time, so I'm just curious, like, that point, better to have nothing or something that's generalized that like might add a story of why you're interested in the agency, but maybe not the specific
Yeah.
EPA specialist, whatever.
Sure. It depends. I mean, the first thing that a hiring manager is probably going to do is have you submit a writing sample. That's like a first step for a lot of hiring managers. So that may give you the chance to tell your story right there. I would say if it's so generic that they're like, whoa, this person must have applied to a lot of jobs, then like, just don't submit it.
Yeah.
Wait until you're prompted and then submit a meaningful writing sample. But I think it's okay to write it to the agency and not necessarily like the job in the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, right? Like you can talk about why you have a dream of working at EPA and your intended career pathway in the federal government. But I wouldn't like just talk about wanting a job in general, right? So it can be a little bit general, but don't be too vague either. Like in that case, if you really can't write it at least to the agency level, then I would just leave it out and wait until you're prompted for a writing sample.
And this is not based on my experience, but my guess or my opinion would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like it's incredibly unlikely you're gonna be in a situation where you've applied to a job and they look at your resume and they're like, cool, I like this guy. Oh, but he doesn't have a cover letter. Like,
Right.
That's you'll likely get to the next
Yeah.
phase. So like it's not a make or break thing.
Yeah,
So
it's not.
yeah.
It's like that extra fluff essentially, like it's that. Yeah, so don't stress over it. If the deadline for the application is tomorrow and you have a really strong resume, but you don't have time to make a competitive cover letter, then just leave it out.
Yeah.
So we have hit the 5 o'clock hour. I think I might have saw 2 more hands, so we can take those last 2 questions before we wrap up. I think I did. Were there any other questions out there?
Where it might start to look a little.
No, because every job has such different specialized experience. And we have a lot of people that applied, and then they came to, presentation like this, and the next time they applied, they were successful, right? So, no, we're not gonna phase somebody out. Now, I will say, I mean, there are occasions where, you see the same person kind of applying again and again to the same type of job and they've been deemed unqualified kind of over and over. So you do start to see kind of like repeat names where you kind of know like, I don't know if this is gonna be a great fit, but nobody's like ruling that person out. We're still gonna do the review process. We're still gonna give everybody a fair chance.
Sorry, this might be a really dumb question. But in terms of what do you hear back whenever you send out one of these USA job things? Do you just hear yay or nay, or do you hear what level of qualification that you were in terms of?
It's hard. I think one of the big complaints that we hear from people is that they feel like their application fell into like a black hole, like they applied to 100 jobs.
Absolutely.
I know, that's what
Yeah.
people
And
feel.
it really depends on the agency you're applying to, because it's not the same across the board.
Right.
And even within the agency that you apply to, if you apply to 2 different jobs in the same agency, there might be 2 different HR teams there. You know what I mean? So that's another difficult part of it. It really changes. Ideally, what happens is you might not get an email, but you can go back on USA Jobs and you can see a change in your status, which I'm sure all of you, or not all of you, but I guess a lot of you are familiar with. But I mean, on my USA Jobs, like I applied to internships like 5 years ago, and like it still says like, ending. So
Yeah.
so hopefully I get it, but we'll see.
There's definitely room for improvement in that regard. Generally speaking, if your resume isn't forwarded on to the hiring manager, then you can really only rely on a status change in USA Jobs. So like if the HR specialist deems you unqualified or ineligible, then you're just relying on your USA Job status to change to show you that. If you get to the hiring manager and they call you for an interview, at that point, it depends on the hiring manager's style. Most hiring managers, if they're acting kindly, if they interview you and you don't get the job, you're gonna hear back from them, but that's gonna be personal style as well. So it's something that I know from experience in the operations section that are working in staffing. They've really tried to make improvements in like the timeline in which those statuses are updated, but they can't always update. Like for folks that get to the hiring manager, that could be a big list, right? And they might only choose to interview 5 of them. But the staffing specialist can't update all the other candidates as non-selected or unselected until the hiring manager makes an official selection. So if that takes the hiring manager another 30 days, it's like this kind of bureaucratic back and forth, right? But we're doing what we can to improve that process. Yeah.
You should have a better experience if you apply to EPA, because you do such a great job.
We're here.
So basically, apply to job. if you-
Right. Look at the stance. Dude. This guy, where do you find him? I don't know. Any other questions, y'all?
One kind
Sure.
of specific question, so I think semi-recently, there was like a larger like call for Peace Corps or AmeriCorps to like return service people to apply as like a big batch of like just throw your name in the hat and then if it fits, we'll get back to you. So is that familiar to you? And if it is,
Yes.
like, what is the timeline to hear back? Because like, I don't recall seeing like a specific like closing date for that. So I
Yeah.
don't know how to like visualize when I will hear my no.
Definitely.
Oh,
I have like a dry sense of humor because I just want to work for like BLM or Forest Service so bad.
Okay.
And it's just like I've applied to 1,000 of them.
Are you non-competitive eligible?
Yeah, I mean, I was for Peace Corps, now I am for AmeriCorps Vista.
When did you
now.
finish your service?
Peace Corps was 2020.
Was that, were you evac?
Yeah.
You're still
You're still
eligible until
eligible.
March. Send us your resume.
Okay,
Yeah.
You don't have to apply online.
okay.
Like EPA is really good about hiring RPCVs.
Yeah.
You have non-competitive eligibility.
Okay. cool.
Yeah.
Let's
You should
do it.
apply to the EPA.
You should apply.
Give us the stance.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah. We're here for you. Yeah.
But yeah, so that is our application repository for RPCVs in Vista. And lists of candidates that send their information there are sent out to hiring managers on like every 6 weeks. So hiring managers get a fresh list of eligible candidates.
Cool.
But an even faster way is through a direct referral. So if there's a job for which you'd be competitive and you get your resume to that hiring manager directly and say, hey, I'm non-competitive eligible. It's very likely that if you are actually qualified, you'll get an interview.
Yeah.
So yeah, shoot us before you leave, grab my email and I'll
Absolutely.
check out kind of.
Just really quickly on the topic of non-competitive eligibility. I don't know, this might have been mentioned, but I missed it. If you work, this is a great perk in the federal government. If you work for the federal government for 3 years, you automatically have non-competitive eligibility for the rest of your life for any federal job.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? And that's huge. Like that is huge. So, I mean, if your plan ultimately maybe is to not work for the federal government, hop in for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then you have that, and then you can leave and come back in like 15 years or so, and you'll have non-competitive eligibility still.
Yeah.
So, again, lots of perks to working at federal agencies.
Yeah, I didn't even talk about, I like skipped the whole portion of talking about benefits, y'all. Yes.
well, I'm actually gonna have to cut you guys off here.
Okay.
But I mean, if you have extra time, want to stick around, I don't know what your schedule looks like. But I'm gonna. So this does conclude the end of EPA's meetup. So thank you, Kate and Ryan. And if it is okay, I don't know if you have like online versions of the handouts in the back, or I can take pictures for our online attendees.
Oh,
just to share with
there may be
you.
extras, there probably will be extras back there, so just keep
And I can
those.
just- perfect.
And then if you shoot me an email, I can also send you digital versions. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Page, loved it. Oh, what was this?
By the way,